Talking about In the End by Demetria Lunetta. This is sort of the part 2 to In the After, which I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, and I said it then and I'll say it again, In the After. However, In the End did not really live up to those expectations. As we learned in the After, the Florries aren't actually aliens, they're more zombie-like because this bacteria was created by the government for chemical warfare, and of course, naturally, it went entirely wrong. We left off in the other human civilization called Fort Black to find Kay's brother Ken, who's working as a doctor there, and he can hopefully help Amy learn a little bit more about the Florries and how the bacteria works to bust out her adoptive sister Baby, who is being used as a lab rat to try and figure out a vaccine to this Florrie bacteria. Now, I was very excited that this series was only going to be 2 books because we had In the After where we learned everything, and then I figured In the End was going to be, alright, go to Fort Black, find Ken, figure out what we need to know, and go back and rescue Baby, which is kind of the direction that In the End takes. However, we spend way too much time in this other civilization, Fort Black, and we don't really learn anything central to the plot until much later down the road, and even then, the final chapters are very rushed, making the end entirely unsatisfying. The problem is that In the End is really paced to be a trilogy. It really seemed like this was supposed to be the second book in a series of 3, and the third one was going to be all of the resolutions where we figure everything out, because mostly what we get is Amy in Fort Black and seeing how other people have learned to survive, because New Hope was very prim and proper, and there were a lot of rules because they expected to be the future that we need to rise out of the ashes of this Florrie apocalypse, whereas Fort Black is just a bunch of people trying to survive, and it's very, very different from New Hope, and I loved seeing that. I really liked seeing how all the different dynamics worked, and we meet a lot of interesting new characters, but none of that was really central to the plot, which was finding Ken, figuring out stuff about the Florries, and then rescuing Baby. We don't get any of that until the author kind of relies on a lot of happy coincidences, and she even mentions it in the book, saying like, oh, isn't it lucky that Kay was flying by so she can fly us back to New Hope? And I'm just like, no, that doesn't really work. If this were going to be a trilogy, then it would have made sense, because the second book would have just been exploring Fort Black, seeing how other people live, and then the third one, when we finally get to the very end like this, you can live like the people in Fort Black, or we can have the best of both worlds. But no, instead we just get a very unsatisfying ending that just didn't really make sense. Because of all that, I'm really only able to give In the End a C+, whereas In the After got an A, but it just really wasn't what it should have been, and it's very disappointing because this story was so amazing, and yet we just got a very meh kind of ending. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button down below, and be sure to subscribe so you can talk books with me every Monday. That's everything I got for you today, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye!